My heart is full today, full of gratitude for the trust you have placed in me, full of love for our country, and full of resolve. The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for, not what we voted for, but hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright.
Hi, I'm Anna Marie Cox, and welcome to another day with Anna Marie Cox. Because we expected to be doing a countdown in negative numbers today, and that's not what happened. And we're just going to do some processing today. That's what today's show is about. And I can't think of another person I would want to talk to more this morning than Josh Gondelman, who is a professional comedian, but that's not why he's here. He's here because he's one of the kindest people I know, and he has a kind of side hustle. It's not a hustle exactly. How would you describe it, Josh? Your motivational speaking.
Oh gosh,
pep
no.
talk.
I do the pep talks, I do the newsletter, but it's more of a compulsion than a hustle.
Didn't mean it like as a hustle.
No,
I kind of just meant it as like that is something that you're known for in
it is
addition to
another
being a
thing that I
comedian.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And I don't think today's a day for pep talks exactly, but I
yeah,
think
same.
I have some ideas about things to think about today, but I'm curious for you. I'm just like, we're really doing this like we did not prepare.
Yeah.
You know
yeah.
what?
We didn't talk about this.
And we did not prepare. I don't have my mic totally right. And I woke up like this for better or for worse. All right. So Josh, tell me.
I think a lot of people feel bad today in the wake of the election. A lot of people probably feel good, which makes the people that feel bad, including myself, feel more bad. But it's a tough time, right? I think where we are now is this was an election that a lot of people felt I think a lot of people felt very attached, myself included, to the idea of Donald Trump being probably one of the worst people on earth who could be president of the United States, which we learned from the time he was president of the United States. And uh, and now he will be again. And I think there's a feeling of confusion that a lot of people are feeling, a feeling of like sadness that a lot of people are feeling. And I think like the big thing is like, well, where do we pour where do we continue to how do we continue to pour our energy into keeping people safe? And specifically I want to, immigrants and trans people and women and all people who can get pregnant or might be pregnant, and how do we continue to like pour energy into keeping those people safe and healthy in a political environment that has now like been re-emboldened, and a political power structure that's been re-emboldened to like um a- attack those groups of people and make them further vulnerable.
all of those things. I think, it just occurred to me like, this show has a very strong value placed on platforming non-cis straight white men.
Sure.
But today I'm actually kind of glad to have you on because you are someone that we're going to need more of. And that whole white dudes for Harris thing that was kind of cringy.
Yeah.
Like, y'all don't abandon us now, okay?
Sure. No, I mean, I did we talk a bunch about that, about the white dudes for Harris the first time I came on the show?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Forget.
We can review it. Super cringy.
Yeah.
But
I think like it is certainly like I it I think it's good ultimately to create spaces where people can feel uh like engaged with, with the I think if that had been the first group that had popped up after Harris was presumptively the nominee, I think that would have been double cringy. But I think like, yeah, it feels like white white men overwhelming. I mean, it doesn't feel like. I think the polling shows, right? White men overwhelmingly voted for Trump.
Oh,
White
was it
women
like
overwhelmingly voted for Trump.
70%? I mean,
Yeah.
like, it was fucking
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it oh.
And I think there were some surprises, right? I think the kind of reactions I've seen. There's been a lot of people going like, "This isn't a surprise. This is America. This is what America is,"
Right.
and I understand that certainly. But I was personally surprised by like the way younger voters broke down. I think there were certainly some things that maybe like were surprised. Not that I did or didn't believe polls. I think like that was just something I didn't necessarily see reflected in polling because I don't follow polls that closely because I can't change them. So I think there were some like sad, distressing surprises and then some sad, distressing expected outcomes. But yeah, again, it's like how do we keep showing up for people. And I think another important thing was like if Kamala Harris had won the presidency, this would also be a question to be asking today, right? Like I think that is not on one level it's not super comforting to be like, "Oh, right, that work doesn't stop if the preferred presidential candidate is elected." But on the other hand, it's like, right, there are people that are more urgently in danger now, but it was always going to be incumbent upon us as like neighbors and friends and citizens and non-citizens to like show up for each other and care for each other.
But I also want to validate all of the feelings
Hmm.
and the feeling that you can't do anything today.
Hmm.
The feeling that you're wiped out, you're despairing, you're hopeless. I am a hopelessness correspondent for Flaming Hydra.
Hmm.
Having experienced a lot of personal hopelessness over the past couple of years. And the thing that I reflect on and want to share about that is that hopelessness kind of gets worse if you just try to deny it or work on it or convince yourself you should be otherwise, or if you um uh do too much to try and like change it or get rid of it. Like I do think that community and action are a way through hopelessness, but to me it's really important to not think of them as kind of the solution, but more just like when you have the bandwidth, if you are able to connect with someone else, even if it's to grieve, we hold each other up and carry each other through that hopelessness to whatever is on the other side.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that sounds very right and good.
Yeah. And I think I know, I don't just think. I mean, from my own personal experience, I know that it's also kind of important to hold on to the memory of hopelessness because if what you're doing is remembering it, then it's also true that at some point you weren't.
Hmm. Right. Right. And I think like there was maybe, if not a collective um forgetting of the hopelessness, but I do think like re-entering another Trump presidency feels bad in a way that I think like maybe some people either were too young to remember the kind of difficult feelings that and challenges of it that are somewhat overlapping with, again, it was somewhat overlapping with the Democratic presidency, but also somewhat more acute and urgent and emboldening to hatefulness, right? So I think like it does feel like there's been some uh it's receded into the distance a little bit, which is like you kind of have to. I understand not wanting to carry these feelings with you every day, especially when there are ongoing challenges to meet in life, right? And being like, oh, I'm gonna still live in the feeling of uh this person being in charge of everything. um, but like, yeah, I think that keeping a little bit of bad feeling
Just
is
remembering it,
yeah.
like in recovery,
Mhm.
you can use the memory, and you want to keep the memory alive of your bottom,
Yeah.
of
Right.
the moment or the period when you realized I deserve better than this,
Mhm.
and I have help. I'm not alone. I can reach out. I can recover. You focus on your recovery in the future and everything, but it is really good to have that little bit of like, "Oh, right. Like, there was a time that I didn't feel this way,
Mhm.
and that is what spurred me to action eventually." Um, I also want to talk about, like, why I'm wearing my Biden shirt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Underneath it, I actually have my Tim Walz meme shirt. Tim Walz has an
Oh,
extra spring
that's
seat to if
cute.
you're interested, because I have 2 Beto t-shirts, right, that I still wear all the time, and not that I love Joe Biden, fully flawed, but part of me just wants to remember all of this happened before and all of it will happen again,
Mhm.
and I actually, when I stopped, I want to know a little bit about what your night was like last night, because for me, I didn't try to not doom scroll. I just like, Anna, you're gonna do it, so like, fine, like, do it. Um, I did have some delicious like charcuterie
Oh,
food
that's
laid
pretty
out for
good.
myself for like snacking. Like I knew I wasn't gonna sit down and have a dinner, but I had some delicious meats and cheeses.
Good move.
And then I stress cleaned.
Mhm.
And then the moment when I realized it was probably over was when Wisconsin had 50% of the vote in, and there was not enough votes in Milwaukee
Mhm.
to move it. And I turned off the news and I watched Battlestar Galactica.
I I went kind of the opposite direction.
Okay.
I my wife and I watched some as I think the hour time difference also changes things because we did some like comfort watching. We did a couple of 30 Rocks. We watched we watch the new What We Do in the Shadows. Um, and then my wife went to bed pretty early. Smart. She's smarter than I am. And I kind of stayed up with just like whatever on TV. And was scrolling on my phone because I don't enjoy watching the pace of cable news coverage usually. I just like my information in little amounts that I can like read and understand as opposed to like vamping to fill infinity hours. Um and my wife woke up at like 11:30 East Coast time when it felt pretty bleak. We'd heard that there were not enough votes in Georgia to make up for the shortfall, and that like the the Trump was ahead by between 1 and 2 points in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and bad feeling. And we stayed up and talked for a little while, and then she went to sleep again, I think. And then I also went to sleep again. But it was like, you know, I ingested a manageable amount of information and then got up this morning and was like, yep, this was as expected when I went to bed. That's what I didn't want to go to sleep and then wake up to a terrible surprise. That was my goal.
Yeah, so I think so first of all, like meta comment, which is something that someone told me a long time ago, was no one is interested in your dreams. And by that they meant like when you fall asleep
Right. Not
dreams. Like,
hopes
and
and
that,
dreams.
yeah. So that like if you start like that's just like not interesting to
Hmm.
people. And a lot of stuff that's like what I did today is not interesting. My ex-husband's family had this weird habit of every morning would ask each other how you slept. And I was always like, what the fuck? Like, it's only news if you didn't sleep. If I don't know how is that news? Like it bothered me. But I feel like we're recalling for each other our nights. I was actually interested in what yours was like. And to me, it's the parallel is where were you on 9/11?
Sure.
Like,
Sure.
because it is a story about like, oh, it's also like a story about watching a car crash or something. Like,
And I think it's also a story of, like, for many people, something unpleasant happening that you mostly ingest through the news. Obviously, there are people
right,
who lost their lives on September 11th and people whose family
right,
members,
right.
but I think for the majority of people, it's something we associate with, like, either a secondhand experience in New York City for a lot of people. My wife lived here at the time, or something that you saw on the news and was very saddening and shocking. So I think, like, that kind of experience is, like, very parallel, right?
Yeah, and it's a shared like the other way. Now I got myself thinking about it. The other way it's not like a dream is it's a shared
Hmm.
experience. It's shared
For
grief,
sure.
and it's a snapshot memory. That's psychologists who study memory. Our memories are pretty fallible,
Hmm.
right? It's the
Totally.
most unreliable form of eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
That the clearest and most reliable memories tend to be flash memories.
Oh, interesting. I didn't
Tend
know
to be
that.
those memories that are snapshot a moment in time. Those are harder, I think, for us to tinker with
Hmm.
in a way.
Fewer moving parts.
Yeah, and so I think that's one of the things that makes this more interesting, and also, but perhaps more than anything else, it's the shared part of it. Is we went even though you and I were, 1,000 miles apart, we went through the same thing. Not exact same instant, but the same thing. And I think there's lots of people who this morning are calling each other up and asking that very same question
Yeah,
about, "So where were
totally.
you? What were you
Yep.
doing? How did you process it?"
Yeah. I
I
also
I
think people have similarly to that, and this is like a much even closer parallel, but I think the people's memories of the 2016
Oh,
election and that aftermath were, like, very vivid. I know a lot of people that were at a group thing. I know a lot of people who are my age or a little older that were, like, at group things, and this year we're like, not doing that again. I know what that how that turns out. And 2020, that was not the feeling, right? Because it
right.
was deep COVID. Um, and more people were spending less time with other people for health reasons. But yeah, I think that the 2016, that feeling of like, oh, we got kind of blindsided thinking maybe it was going to be a celebration or at least a relief, and then being like, oh, the bad one happened. But I also know people who are younger that I think don't even if they're, people in their late 20s who were young adults at the time of the 2016 election that didn't quite have that feeling of being like out and about professional people living in a city, having to go to work the next day. Um, that are it's just like such an interesting age gap, I think. Like, and I'm curious to like talk to some younger friends because I have my friends. I want to shout out the folks who run at Ellie Yerman and Reed Pope and the whole crew at Late Stage Live, which is a comedy show that they do, like a topical comedy show they do for Brooklyn Public Access, I believe. That's also on YouTube, and it's very like a very queer staff and perspective on the news. And they did like a live event last night, and I was like, oh, that feels like you're 10 years younger than me. And I would, after working in late night comedy at that period, the idea of recreationally or like professionally, but electively doing political comedy on election night feels miserable.
Actually, I was on The Daily Show on the night 2016 election night
Really?
2016. Yeah, it's
Whoa.
funny.
Okay. So there it
Like,
is.
they never asked me back, and I feel a little bit hurt by that, to be honest, but also maybe it's just a bad memory for everyone.
I bet that's it. I think that's what it is. It's like, oh, we don't want any part of this feeling sticking with
And
us.
so my story about 2016, and I do think it's actually important to talk about this because what has what has happened before will happen again. Thank you, Battlestar Galactica. That's
Mhm.
like one of the catchphrases of Battlestar Galactica. This has all happened before, and it will happen again. Is how we survived 2016, right? So what happened for me was I was working at MTV News, and I was actually the
Oh,
on-camera person.
right.
I wasn't usually on camera at MTV News, but I was the at the big studio,
Yeah.
like wearing designer clothes that I didn't get to keep. And they did not prepare well for Clinton's
I think a
loss.
lot of people, I think a lot of institutions didn't.
And so I remember being on stage and reporting in the results and someone coming up to me and being like, we have to find a piece of good news. We have to find a piece of good news. And it was like Florida passing a, a marijuana measure that now doesn't exist anymore. It
Wow.
was
Ooh.
like, it was like little bits of like,
Yeah.
ballot proposals. And then I went to do Daily Show before it had been called, but when things looked really
Yeah.
bad.
Yep.
And I actually cried on air.
Sure. It was a bad
Because Trevor
time.
Noah was like, "So what do you think this says about the country?" And I was like, "That we're racist and sexist
Mhm.
more than we realized."
Yeah.
And I will say, people have heard me say this before, if they hear me talk about this at all, but it was the young people of color at MTV News that were not surprised.
Totally. Yeah. I
Who
mean,
were like, "Yeah, you thought this country wasn't racist?"
right. Right. And I think like that is an extremely uh like understandable reaction. And I think we have to hope and work towards a future where like that is not the truth, right? That's not an accurate, um, at least not an accurate representation of like how we choose to be governed and choose to govern ourselves.
And but I look back to the people of color that we've interviewed on this show before. And I sometimes tell that story, and I think I'm trying to get a little bit of a white person merit badge because, like, look, I realize all this, and like, see, I'm hip to like how racist we are. That I think of Rebecca Nagel, and I also think of Peggy Flanagan and what they've said about that. And Rebecca Nagel pointed out that during the the political environment that led to the Trail of Tears, there were a lot of white people who supported Indigenous rights.
Mhm.
And that's also really that they wound up kind of losing, but there's also kind of hope to be gained from the memory of like we have worked together, like we have like fought for things. And I was looking at Roxanne Gay's Blue Sky feed today, and she was kind of like, "Look, y'all, like, yeah, it sucks, but this is part of what we do. This is
Mhm.
like part of what we do in America, and we don't get the luxury." I don't think she used that. That's my wording of just sitting in it.
Mhm.
Although, again, I want to emphasize: do only what you can do. Let yourself grieve. Don't push yourself. All those feelings are valid. All of that is true. And then also, there is something on the other side. There is always something on the other side.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like we get to and have to w- work on making the other side as safe and healthy as it can be for as many people as we can.
And that's where you come in,
Oh no,
Josh
me?
Gondelman. Yeah,
Uh-oh.
straight, white, cis dude. um, because I think y'all cannot abandon us. And I speak just for like my little piece. There's lots of work to be done and lots of listening to be done. Lots of looking, and this is true for me too, and this is true for anyone who kind of hasn't been already grounded in mutual aid and in activism. I think the other thing, this has all happened before and will happen again, tells us is that there are already people doing this work,
Totally.
and you can seek out those people, and they are the people that if we ever need an underground railroad, if we ever need a resistance that not isn't the marching in the streets um, with the pink hats, which great, important, whatever. If we need a resistance that's more like moving people across state lines kind of thing,
Mhm.
Those are the people that are going to know how to do it.
Oh, I remember after Roe was overturned, right? There being like turmoil around people who are kind of like freelance trying to and ad hoc trying to make up some of those gaps, and then that causing some strain on like organizations that had either measures in place or like a history of doing similar work that had laid the groundwork for future work. And so I think, yeah, like really listening and finding the people who are already doing this kind of organizing and aid and making yourself of use. And I say you, I'm speaking in the second person. I'm talking to me also. Um, speak, and uh, providing support and assistance in the way that people um, want and need, rather than trying to build the new plane in the air, I guess is a metaphor of like, I'm going to fix it this way. And like, actually, there's already people on that. You can just kind of show up and carry stuff for them or give them money or, or both.
Yeah, and I did a big story for Texas Monthly on this, and it was specifically about faith leaders who were already part of organizations who were doing that kind of work. And one of the things that they said that fits in here is that you may think you are ready to drive women across state lines or smuggle them abortion pills or whatever. But it is important to do the work of educating yourself around anti-racism, to educating yourself around your own hangups around reproductive health, uh, to educate yourself about what already exists, like we're saying. But it starts so far, like, if you wanna do that kind of work, it starts so far back. Like, one woman I talked to, was telling me about there are churches, there was a affirming church movement that started in the '90s where churches would say, "We affirm same-sex marriage," and they put it on their website and do same-sex marriage services and deliver sermons on that, and all of that is great, and I do think it helped move the needle. And now there's churches that wanna be reproductive rights affirming churches. I can't remember the name that they're using, but it's a similar kind of thing. And this woman organizes around that, and she told me all these stories about people being like, "We wanna" after Roe fell, like, tons of calls. "Can't wait. We wanna be a refuge. We wanna be a sanctuary. Let us help." And she's like, "Alright, first, I'm gonna come or gonna send someone to do, like, a series of a month-long series of workshops where we talk about the congregation's experience with reproductive health. Like, do you know anyone that's ever had to struggle with reproductive health? Like, what are your hangups about it? You know, what do you know about this process?" And, like, when I did the training on this, which I've mentioned before in the program, like, I did train that kind of not for a faith leader, but I did, like, a, practical aid workshop, which is the same sometimes what that's called. Uh, and the first workshop was about anti-racism. It
Hmm.
wasn't about
Yeah.
it it wasn't about, like, how we're gonna deliver abortion pills to women.
Right.
No. And also, they haven't called me. And I figure that's because I'm 4th or 5th on the death chart.
Sure. 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 Right. And maybe
Like
that's like good that people are taken care of there.
I just need to keep going to workouts,
Yeah.
and, it's they'll call me when they need to call
Hmm.
me, and I just keep going to there's only meetings, like, every once in a while, and,
Yeah.
like but someone else because I'm there, someone else is able to do that practical support and knows that they'd have backups, right? Uh, what who I feel like I wanna tap into your experience with keeping your own ability to have would you say that is it what you are able to tap in is hope? Or, like, you do these pep talks. What's that like, Josh? Where does that come from for you?
I guess it's a feeling of like relative. I've I'm fortunate to have a relatively stable, steady life, and by that I mean like the material conditions around having enough money to pay my bills and uh having like a relatively fortunate brain chemistry that like I feel like I have a pretty when things are bad, I'm like that's bad and it can be fixed or it'll feel bad for a while. And when things are good, I'm like nice, that's good. And so I think like being able to knowing that about myself, it helps me be able to offer just like a little bit of like perspective sounds so condescending, but like yeah, I think it's a hopefulness, right? Or like an affirmation that things things that are bad won't always be bad is like a real helpful thing for me to think about. And like, sometimes people uh I wrote to somebody in my newsletter this week about someone who said like, we have this newborn kid and everyone in our family wants to see them and it's all within Texas, but it's like a lot of holiday travel and it's a pain in the ass. And it's like part of the pep talk is like that is a pain in the ass. And like you don't have to act like it's not, or you don't have to like pretend to yourself that it's not annoying. But this is like, you know, eventually you'll have more choices of how to celebrate a holiday. And like the perspective of uh this is a pain in the ass because like every fucking thing is a pain in the ass. And these are the best circumstances is that you have a lot of loving family that wants to see your new baby. And like even that is logistically annoying and that's okay. So I think just like you did at the beginning of this recording of saying like it's okay to like have a bad feeling and acknowledge it and like need it and stomp around in it for a little while because that's part of working through it rather than just trying to like tuck it away in a corner of your brain that you like don't look at very often.
I'm thinking right now about whether it's important to talk about the concrete fears we have
Sure.
because I do know that some of my fears are just amorphous.
Hmm.
And those are like all feelings are valid. All feelings are valid. All feelings are valid. Um, but sometimes talking through things, you get to a place of like, well, what's the smallest thing that I can do about it? Right.
Yeah.
So, do you think that's a downer for us to talk about, or do you think it'd be worthwhile to talk
um it could be both.
about? I because I think, my thinking goes directly to reproductive rights.
Totally.
Um, for me, a kind of ironic take on that is that things are already so bad here in Texas
Hmm.
that at least we already have some structures in place. That's where I go with that particular thing if I wanna play it out and think like, "Well, what can I do?" I also think about I was really serious about looking into moving back to Minnesota, um, if Trump won,
Yeah. Kind of
and
a soft launch of moving to Canada that a lot of people say they'll do.
yeah, I and it's similar, it's a refuge state, and I do think if I was a parent of a trans kid, I would move there.
For sure. I mean, so
Like, just that's what I would do.
that's something that popped into my head as well, right? Is like in addition to abortion rights, reproductive health care, um, gender affirming care is something that's like it feels like there's gonna be a real assault. Like I don't know if you watched the World Series. I did out of inborn hatred for the New York Yankees. So I watched to cheer against them, which is psychologically just uh, a real mess to disentangle myself from. But I have no interest in that. Not talking about it. But the ads, the transphobic campaign ads were like truly revolting. And it's like, oh, this is what they're hammering. This is like the closing message is like trans people are bad and gross. And it's like extraordinarily fucked up. And like that is something that I think is going to get that assault is going to get worse and worse on trans people's rights and access to medical care.
And I think on that point of like, what's the thing that's within my sometimes in recovery, we talk about the hula hoop, like
I don't
what's
know
within,
this.
oh,
Oh,
like what's within my hula hoop?
got it,
Like
got it,
what's
got it. Like it's a
like,
little bit outside yourself, but not too far.
yeah, like what is it that I can affect in my hula hoop,
Got
right?
it.
So when I think about abortion care, something I really do believe is I don't think there are other people doing the work. It's really important to look into mutual aid. It's really important to just give to abortion funds. That's actually 35,000 women left Texas last year to get abortions.
Wow. That's so many. I mean, it's such a common healthcare procedure, right? It's like one of the most common healthcare procedures that people receive. And I think like ig- ignoring that fact or like eliding that fact is really scary and dangerous because you're like we're talking tens of thousands of people in one state alone having to, and those are the people that had the
We're
resources
lucky.
or able to, right, find the resources to leave the state for that kind of care.
So giving money to abortion travel funds, voting in local elections to support like local administrations that will do as much as they can for that kind of activity. Here in Austin, Austin has an abortion is passed and is attempting to protect an abortion fund
Cool.
so people can get money to leave from the city or county government.
Wow.
So give to abortion funds, support local people who are pro-choice. Pro-choice is a local issue as much as it is a national or state issue.
I mean, that
Uh,
and that was one, sorry, I interrupted, but like I think like we're talking about glimmers of hope in 2016, which are hard to come by. And I think in 2024, it does feel like there were, maybe I'm misremembering, but there were more ballot initiatives that were like statewide attempts to make people's lives healthier and better, right? Abortion was enshrined in New York, I think Colorado,
Missouri.
Maryland, Missouri, right, where there was like basically an outright ban, yeah, since 2022. And I would always think when I was in Kansas City, the way I could remember which side was, I was like on the Kansas side, you can get an abortion. On the Missouri side, you can buy weed. And now in Missouri, you can do both.
You can do
Um,
both.
mhm.
It's a party.
Yeah.
Um,
But like this is 7 states, I think. And so it's like these are the kinds of things like there is hope and there are people working on it and that can be supported.
it's in your hula hoop, right?
It's in your loop.
And the other thing I will say is this sounds a little bit like one of those heroic Underground Railroad things, but I'm going to put it in a little context, which is if you are a woman, order abortion pills and just have them. I have them in my closet, in my linen closet. And I don't plan on smuggling them to anyone, but you know what? If a friend of mine is like, I might hear about it. And there are ways to safely manage an abortion. There are institutions you can do calls. There's, all kinds of ways to have that happen. I am really unlikely to get pregnant. I was just not, I mean, just, yeah, really unlikely. But I think having those on hand is a good step. And I would also say, even if you live in a state where abortion is legal, have them on hand because you might hear about a friend or a friend of a friend that's stuck someplace. And again, be very careful about that. I don't want to encourage people just like hand them out, but like you never know. Someone who could be trying to get them and the mail is delayed because places like Texas, maybe they're going to outlaw the shipment of abortion pills. So I think that's a really practical thing. And then on the trans issue, I think remember that can be a local issue as well. So look to your local elections about people who support trans folks. And then I think it's this again within the hula hoop, supporting trans people, supporting trans creators. Like literally just like buying stuff on Etsy from trans people. When people on social media, someone who you know is a trans person, like is selling stuff or is a creator of some kind, like support that person. Like there are things that just aren't sexy, you know, that are what everyone can do. Uh, as a journalist, probably that what I believe will be a crackdown on media is the thing that could affect me the most. Just like me personally. And what I would like ask of folks is unsubscribe for the Washington Post. Maybe not forever. Maybe just send a message and then support worker owned publications, cooperative publications. And sometimes when I talk about this stuff, I think about going back to 9/11 weirdly. I just feel like that is like a place to look at. The Onion story about not knowing what else to do,
Woman
woman
bakes
bakes
American
cake.
flag cake. Yeah. One of the great pieces of writing in the English language.
And that sometimes buying like a piece of art from a trans person might feel like that. But if you have given that trans person $50, that is $50 they didn't have.
Yeah. And
And
it is also like a more localized and effective way of like, people talk about voting with your dollar, where like whatever your yearly subscription is to the Washington Post isn't keeping the lights on at the Washington Post, but it is helping to keep the lights on at a smaller worker supported, worker owned journalism collective. And the same thing with like, if you, whatever uh, elective thing you're opting out of financially, it doesn't mean as much to that big corporation as it does to like the person whose pocket you're putting money in directly. And I think that's different than bigger boycott movements. Obviously, I think that is like politically effective. But like if you're just kind of freelance being like, fuck the Washington Post, I think like, you're not going to be the difference between the Washington Post making rent and not making rent. That all just depends on whether Jeff Bezos decides to be openly fascist or just quietly aligned with the financial interests of fascism
yep. And I
and
just
against
don't,
labor.
and it pains me, but is true. There was a moment like my career actually did okay for a little bit, for a while after 2016, because people were just so hungry for resistance
Hmm.
related stuff, right? And I worked at Crooked
Hmm.
Media and they, wow, like that was like riding a rocket ship. It was insane. The amount of like interest and advertising that they
Yeah, I'm
got.
sure.
And, it helped pay. The reason I could put a down payment on this house is because of Crooked Media. And I don't think that's going to happen this time.
Yeah.
I don't think the subscriptions at the New York Times, for what I would say are good reasons.
Hmm.
I don't think you're going to see subscriptions at the New York Times and Washington Post skyrocket. I really hope that the Washington Post takes down that fucking democracy dies in darkness slogan. I am so pissed about that now.
Hmm.
Like, it's just a slogan for them. It is just a slogan. And I don't think CNN's going to remember those CNN ads that were apple and orange, like an apple and a banana.
Hmm.
They were
Vaguely.
like, CNN will never tell you that an apple is a banana.
Oh.
Yeah.
And now they're like, every show we have one guy that's like, are we sure that's not a banana?
And they're like, "You know what? Good point. Maybe
Yeah.
it is a banana."
Yeah.
Like,
Teach
we
the
really think it's
controversy.
important to platform banana
And maybe
seeders.
people are just saying that that's a banana because they need potassium. They're craving
They just
potassium.
yeah, they're economically insecure, and
Mhm.
so
They're potassium insecure.
they're
These
potassium
people
insecure.
are cramping up.
And I hope people are wary of that kind of stuff now. I don't think it's useful to do a lot of autopsies of this election. I think the answer about why Harris didn't win is painfully clear.
Mm.
There is a part of me that's more than willing to blame, though.
Sure. Feels good to blame.
Maybe we should have done this at the top and then got to the hopeful stuff, but,
But I think there's a way to think about this hopefully, right?
okay,
Like
yeah.
there is a way to look at this and go like, what what are more hopeful, wholesome, useful places to put um resources and energy, and that's like within and without the Democratic Party, right? Like what can the Democratic Party apparatus do better to appeal to it, because millions fewer people voted, and like and I don't think it's useful or honest to like discount racism and sexism, both in terms of suppressing turnout for Harris and driving turnout for Trump. But I also think that there are things that there uh checks and balances, concessions, bargains that the party apparatus generally made that feel like they didn't help, and maybe they aren't the right thing to do in the future.
And at the top of my shit list is institutional media.
Sure.
I blame the Democratic Party is for sure, or elements of it. I think it's really important. Oh, you were talking about bright spots. We have the first transgender congressperson,
That rules.
like Sarah McBride in Delaware.
Yeah.
Uh, that is, I mean, that gives me so much hope. Like honestly,
Mhm.
like that happened. That's a wedge, right? Hopefully, if we will continue to fight and support people, that is a wedge. Uh, and so I don't want us to be like the Democratic Party sucks.
I think
They
there are
kind of do.
I think there are certainly lessons to be learned if
Yes, I
people are
agree.
interested in learning lessons.
Yes, and so, but I also think that resources, if you're going to, I did give money to the Democratic Party. Mainly, I bought 3 of the Harris Wells camo hats. Um, so, and I bought a Coach T-shirt, which I will wear with pride. Uh, but I do think like our resources, like really think about where your resources go, and if you have limited resources, maybe not the party for
And
now.
certainly on a national level, it
Yeah.
feels like a lack of money in politics is not the problem, right? Like, gosh, there's not enough money at the top of these
Yeah.
presidential campaign tickets.
And then it goes back to, like, the the shit list that has the media on the top, which is the sane washing
Hmm.
that happened, the banana supporters, the banana seers
Hmm.
that were continually platformed. Um, the I don't know, I want to blame mainstream media, institutional media somehow for Elon Musk. I don't know how exactly to make that equation work, but
Well, I think if he had been viewed with overall a little more skepticism in the early days of his ascent to being a media figure, I do think there would be, if not, I think the ceiling on how big an empire he was able to build, just in terms of his like influence rather than just the money, it would be lower.
yeah, every billionaire is a policy error
Yes,
for
agreed.
sure. Um, it's another kind of like what's in your hula hoop thing, which is to get off Twitter, get off Facebook. Like social media is not really the answer, although it can feel really supportive sometimes. You and I are both on Blue Sky. Blue
Hmm.
Sky is not owned by a billionaire. It is much more diffuse. It is still public and can be monitored.
Hmm.
So everyone just know that. I'm not a huge Mastodon fan, but if that's your thing, yeah.
It's never really clicked with me.
But Blue Sky is just a lot like early Twitter. I feel very proud of my feed because I apparently curated one that doesn't have pundits doing autopsies.
Hmm.
So woo, it was a lot of mutual support.
Yeah.
I do think I would be remiss to not mention recovery and how important it is to not give the other side the gift of your recovery. Not to, I mean, for me, it would be drinking, like I'm not gonna let him have that. I worked too hard to be okay. And that wouldn't help anything. Uh, it would in fact make it impossible for me to do what I can do, right? And I think no matter what, I think we're all today recovering from something. So that's another take care of yourself, put your oxygen mask on first. Any kind of, I just want to be so careful because I don't want to take away any coping mechanisms. But also, I think people have probably an intuitive understanding of the ways they need to take care of themselves right now. And for me, part of that self care is doing the stuff I need to do to stay in the space of recovery. And, I was in Blue Sky, and I remember after the 2016 election, people told me they might drink. And I said, don't let them win. Don't
Yeah.
let that is given points to the other side.
Right. Right. And for no victory, right? You're not scoring any points
Yeah.
yourself.
So this has been lovely for me.
I always love talking to you.
And I hope there's been something in this for you.
Of course. I always find it very reflective and restorative when we get to talk on the podcast or just as pals.
And it's funny, my dad is calling right now, and I know why. I've gotten a lot of calls today. Have you gotten a lot of calls today?
I've gotten a bunch of texts. I don't think any calls. Nobody's calling.
Well, my dad's a boomer, so.
Yeah. No, my dad texts. Well, this is a slight digression, but my dad and my mom, somehow their phone numbers are kind of merged. So they both text, and I don't know who I'm hearing from, because I'll text what I think is my mom. It'll say, Mom, it's the phone number that she's had for years. And I'll say, hey, Dad's birthday is coming up. What's his jacket size? I found this jacket I think you'd like. And then I get a text back that goes, large. This is him.
So I guess my last thing is connect with folks. I will be calling him back. That this conversation can be a conversation you have with anyone, and I think it will be restorative to folks, this kind of conversation. And I imagine that's what I'm going to be doing a lot of today.
Yeah, I think so.
So what about you? Tell me a little bit what you're going to do and any last thoughts you have before you wrap up.
Gonna spend a lot of time with my wife Maris and kind of just be present with her. I've got a little work stuff I'm gonna do just to kind of spend a little time outside of my own life brain, and then getting a bunch of texts, sending out a bunch of texts just to kind of check in with people, and people who are in this work already, and people who I think feel really imperiled by the shifting political realities in America, or the concretizing of this political reality in America. So just I don't know, being there for people is always a nice thing to do.
Again, thank you for being here for me. And
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I hope I was helpful and not too stupid.
you're pretty awesome. And this show will continue in a slightly different form. Perhaps we will have you back.
Great.
And I will be sharing more on that probably in a bit. Thanks so much for being here, Josh.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure to see you as always.
Hey, folks, this show, 90 Days with Anna Marie Cox, is now becoming another day with Anna Marie Cox. We are moving to Patreon. If you are already interested in supporting us, you can go to patreon.com/AnnaMarieCox. It is where we're going to have thoughtful conversations with smart people. We will be releasing episodes every Wednesday. You will still get episodes on the regular feed, wherever you subscribe. But if you want the most up-to-date episodes and bonus content, including AMAs and access to a new Discord, you're going to have to go through Patreon, which is, again, patreon.com/AnnaMarieCox. You will have an opportunity to give lots of different kinds of support, from $4 all the way up to $50. And all of those levels will get you special access and bonus episodes. You just get more and more as you go up. And your support will make a big difference. So again, if you're interested in coming with us on this journey into whatever the future holds, and you like the kind of support and community that this show offers, please go to patreon.com/AnnaMarieCox, because this show, which was 90 Days with Anna Marie Cox, is now becoming Another Day with Anna Marie Cox. Hope to see you there.
We have been intentional about building community and building coalitions, bringing people together from every walk of life and background, united by love of country with enthusiasm and joy in our fight for America's future.